Hello, everyone. I'm Eric D'Souza, and it is my pleasure today to be interviewing Donalee Moulton because she has been nominated for the Best Crime Short Story Award of Excellence for her story, Troubled Water. Hi, Donalee. How are you today?
I am fine, thank you, and delighted to be here.
Be here again, we should say. I was counting. This will be our fourth interview together, and you'll be my most interviewed guests. So that's pretty cool.
It's always wonderful to win something.
Um, I should also mention that Troubled Water was also nominated for a Derringer, so it's not just Canadians that love your short story, the Americans do too. Well, let's start with a bio. So, Donna Lee has been writing professionally for over 25 years. She has been published in the Globe and Mail, Chatelaine, Maclean's, Canadian Business, and the National Post. Her short story, Swan Song, is in the CWC's anthology Cold Canadian Crime, which was also nominated for an Award of Excellence last year. Her first mystery book, Hung Out to Die, was published in 2023. Her second novel, Conflagration, was published in 2024. As I mentioned, we've had a few interviews before, so you can learn a little bit more about Swan Song and Conflagration in previous interviews, and I'll leave links at the bottom. Am I saying it right? I know last time I did half the interview saying
It's
conflagration.
conflagration, but that's
Conflagration.
close enough because it's old language because the story is set in 1734, so we should stumble over
And I'm in the right spot. So let's today talk about Troubled Water. Well, let's start with its inspiration. I know that it has a Crime Writers of Canada angle, so maybe you could tell us a little bit about that.
it. Absolutely. As you and I were talking before you pressed record, short stories were one of the things that I loved to do in my youth. And then, the reality of mortgages and car payments and everything came along and they moved to a back burner. And I must admit, I hadn't really thought about writing short stories until the Crime Writers of Canada set out their call for submissions for Cold Canadian Crime to celebrate their 40th anniversary. And I thought, oh, what the heck? I can do this. I can write a short story. And sure enough, I did. And wonderfully, it was included in the anthology. But to a certain extent, the parameters around that competition kind of determined the nature of what I would write and how I would write it. And wonderfully, I landed on setting the story in Iqaluit, which seems to have resonated with readers, which is wonderful.
Well, let's talk about setting then. One thing that us Canadian writers often hear from publishers is that we can't set our stories in Canada. You chose to set it up north in Iqaluit, which is about as Canadian as you can get. And I don't think even Canadians know sort of what that setting is like. So, sort of a two-part question. Could you tell us a little bit about your setting, what it's like living up there, but also the Americans didn't seem to, or at least the American panelists didn't seem to mind that your story was set up in Canada. So, what do you think about that advice we often hear?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think that I understand the marketing impetus behind that statement. And for me, the only, well, one of the big requirements for the Cold Canadian Crime was that the theme of your short story had to be cold. It could be a cold case, it could be an estrangement, a cold relationship. But as I think I've said in the past, I just went straight for the default, cold temperatures, cold weather. And because although I'd never lived in Iqaluit, I had done a lot of work in Iqaluit. So for 4 or 5 years, I was back and forth regularly to Iqaluit, spending time there. And so I don't think I consciously gave the setting any more depth of thought than checking off the checklist that I was well within the requirements now for cold. But the judges for that competition, all three of them pointed out that they loved the fact that it was set in Iqaluit and that they could learn about a place that they would rarely get, if ever, to visit. And the Derringers several people wrote to me just to congratulate me. But one fellow wrote me and said, this is what I love about a short story is not just, plot and characters, but when I get to learn about a new place. And so I think that you're right. I think the setting in this case is resonating with people because it's different, but yet it's real.
I think one thing that's so essential to a short story is that you can't waste words. So you have to explain the setting, but you have to do it quickly. And you gave some examples, like even simple things like it takes longer to receive things from Amazon. And, well, actually, why not? I'll let you tell the story. They live on the tundra. Could you explain what that is?
Absolutely. So houses in Iqaluit don't sit on the ground because the ground is frozen all year round. And so if you put a building on flat on the ground, cold would be seeping up through the building. So everything is built up. And a lot of people that I know up there refer to it as on stilts, but the idea was that you had to be elevated, and it just became a very natural way to look at the environment, that everything should be elevated. And of course, when you're elevated like that, what sometimes happens is you tilt. So it was not atypical to walk into a room and have the floor tilted on you. So it is a different environment. And I think for Canadians, it resonates because it is part of our environment. But to your point, Americans and others also have those cold extremes and those areas that are isolated and removed. So I think that the fact that it's Canadian based is not as big an issue as we might otherwise think.
You're also saying another hardship that they have to go through is the price of food. And I think the example you gave is like lettuce could easily be $6. I'm assuming, can't really grow food up there either. So everything has to be imported.
As far as I know, there was an attempt at one time, if I remember correctly, to do some hothouse, some greenhouse growing. And there may be some still small little pockets of that somewhere, but almost everything is brought in by plane. I was up there once when I think it was the satellite system went down, and the last plane was leaving from Ottawa to come north, and the local grocery store wasn't able to get the order in time because the satellite system was down. So people working in government offices were trying to send emails to some of the suppliers in Ottawa to say, you've got to get this food to the airport by this time, because otherwise we don't have any food over the weekend. And it'll be another 2 or 3 days after that. So it's a different way of living altogether. I had a friend who was just reading something, and I can't remember if it was Cheese Whiz or if it was marinara sauce, but there was something that was a small jar was now $10 a jar for
Wow.
the baby one. Yeah,
I
it's
know.
very expensive.
I know in BC we complain about prices of food, but they got us beat. Well, let's talk about your character. So you were saying it's sort of a fish out of water story a little bit. We got Police Chief Doug Brumel, who's from Saskatchewan, and he's just promoted to police chief. And how is it like it for him? Because it's such a different culture, but at the same time, he's coming in a position of authority. So it must make it quite unique for him.
And I think it's an interesting question because there's two factors at play here. I think absolutely, and they call us people from the South. So are you from the South? Are you from down South? That kind of thing. I think when we land in Iqaluit, we are very acutely aware that we are indeed a fish out of water. There is no way in or out of Iqaluit except by air or water. There are no roads that go anywhere else, right? So it is a really closed environment, and things like gastrointestinal flu, the government will immediately issue news releases because that can spread through the community in a matter of days. So you are aware that this is a way of living that I'm not familiar with. It's also an environment that I'm not familiar with, like -40, -45, right? Walking on tundra, all of those kinds of things are very, very different. And you're also aware when you work up north that it is a privileged position that you are there, and that the whole goal is to have people from the community take over those jobs. But at this point in time, they may not have the expertise or experience, and so they're looking for assistance from South, and that's what he's doing. He goes in knowing that there will be one day a police chief from the community, and it will not be him.
Um, this is the second time now you've been nominated for a short story, and again, also a Derringer. Does that inspire you to write more stories about this, about the police chief in Aquila?
Oh, you know what it does? It confuses the bejesus out of me. To be perfectly honest, it's like, okay, I wrote a short story and it got published and it got nominated, and I wrote a follow-up short story and I had such wonderful luck with it. And so is it a sign from the gods? And do I pay very close attention? Do I decide that there's a novel in this or a screenplay? I've never written a screenplay. I had no intentions to write a screenplay, but then I didn't have any intentions to write a short story either, right? So I do feel that the response to the Iqaluit Constabulary, as the pilot project is called, I do feel that there's something there that seems to resonate with people, and so I want to respect that, but I'm just not quite sure yet how to respect it. And to your fish out of water point, my character right now really is very new to the community. So he can think, act, feel differently than he's going to feel a year, 2 years, 5 years in. And so whatever happens, it will have to grow with him as his awareness of what it means to live in the North grows, without actually being of the North.
The other question then is short stories. It's hard to write novels and make a living writing novels. It's much, much harder doing that for short stories. So do you think you're going to keep in this as short story writing, or is it time for something bigger? And also, what do you think of, I guess, another two-parter, what do you think of short stories and the state of short stories? We were just mentioning, we're recording this today on May the 14th, and Alice Munro just passed away. It's hard to imagine short stories without her.
Truly a legacy that not only Canadians, but the world is indebted to. And you want to rise up and say, if only in memory of Alice Munro, we're not going to let the short story die. But I did read very recently, I believe it was a letter from the president of the Writers Union of Canada, talking about the difficulty that short story writers face in a market that does not seem to be interested in that form. At the same time, there's a whole burgeoning market for things like flash fiction and microfiction, which are getting shorter and shorter and shorter. So it just adds to the general confusion. And so to your point, I think I'm just going to let my heart dictate what comes next, and right or wrong, I'll worry about that after something has been written.
Well, let's both congratulate one of your fellow peers from the Atlantic region. Helen C. Escott's recently been optioned for Rinkrat. I saw by Rinkrat. I read that on Facebook. And I'm also thinking in my neck of the woods, Kathy Ace, it's in production for hers. Do you think there's a movie or a TV series that could be based on your series?
I think we should start spreading the word now. I'm very much in favor of that. Absolutely. I mean, as you know, as writers, when we craft short, long, whatever it is that we're crafting, it comes to life for us. So these people have forms and shapes and dimensions and heights, and you can picture them. So absolutely, I can see it translating to other formats. But again, I don't know that I'm the one that's going to do the translating into the formats.
That's great. So we'll leave it at that, Donalee. I could wish you the best of luck. And you were telling me you were feeling a little bit like a bridesmaid lately, but hopefully I'll have better news for you
Delightfully
around
so.
May 29th.
Perfect. Thank you.